The iPhone Air is the most quintessential Apple device that they have launched in decades. That's a statement that I'm going to wholeheartedly stand behind. I stand by this statement so much that I believe that the iPhone Air is the iPhone that would have launched if Steve Jobs were still around. It carries all of the hallmarks of the great late Steve Jobs and Jony Ive designs. And most of all, it's a piece of hardware that excites me in a way that no other iPhone has for many years. I would say, especially since Jony Ive left in 2019, I feel like that iPhones have lost that ambition in pushing the limits of hardware design that Apple was once known for. I mean, iPhones have become increasingly practical with better cameras and larger batteries, which to be fair is great for practicality, but has practicality ever made the heart flutter? I don't think so. Let's remind ourselves of iPhones throughout history. The original iPhone introduced a slim premium metal build and a glass touchscreen, which looked so cool that it caused jaws to drop back in the day. The iPhone 4 introduced the glass sandwich with the stainless steel frame, and to this day, I still think it feels incredible in the hand. The iPhone 5, meanwhile, was so thin and light that it's still revered to this day. The iPhone 6 was also incredibly thin, but more importantly, incredibly ergonomic as well, with its curved design and 2.5D curved glass. To this day, no iPhone feels better in the hand than the original iPhone 6. And the iPhone 10, well, that convinced me that there was no need for luxury phones like Virtues anymore, because the all-screen design with an incredible stainless steel and glass build put it in an elevated space for design that no competitor would touch for many years to come. Jony Ive left Apple 2 years after that, and since then, well, we've seen nothing really. Every iPhone since the 10 has just been a rehash of what had come before. With the 12, we got a slightly boxier design, and then with the 15, we went slightly more rounded again. That jaw on the floor wow factor that made the previous version feel instantly dated of new iPhones had gone. And it felt like that all design ambition had left the room. I mean, yes, the batteries got bigger, and yes, the cameras got bigger and better, but there was just nothing special about those designs at all. Nobody could say, oh my god, look at the new iPhone 16, it makes the 14 look so old and dated, I feel so compelled to buy the new one. And this all culminates in this year's launch of the iPhone 17 Pro. Because what an uninspired design this is. Not only is it the thickest iPhone since the iPhone 4S of 2011, but it looks like that it was formed by engineers and not designers. Because there's no way that Jony Ive would have let this camera module, or plateau as they call it, slip by, because it is absolutely hideous. And look at this contrast, but not quite contrast, glass cutout over here. There's no elegance to this design solution at all. I mean, it's very practical, it allows the wireless charging to go through, but it is hideous. The iPhone 17 Pro, yes, the battery life is great, the performance and thermals are phenomenal, and the cameras are stupendous as well, but what is the fun in that, design-wise at least? And fun is what the iPhone Air brings in spades. I mean, just look at it, especially compared to the 17 Pro. I mean, it just gives me that excitement that I had when holding the iPhone 6 for the very first time. It's so slim that it almost feels like magic in the hand. And while I wasn't so enamored about the device while watching the presentation, when I saw it at the Apple Store for the first time, I just knew that it was love at first sight. Not only was it beautiful, but it was also ambitious. It's a perfect marriage between hardware design and incredible engineering. So why am I returning it then? Why have I chosen the ugly and fat iPhone 17 Pro instead? Well, that is a question that I will be answering in this video. Hi all, my name is Davis and welcome to my channel where we talk about all things tech. If you enjoy videos like this one, then feel free to like and subscribe, and this video is also sponsored by the Arc Pulse case, although my Arc Pulse for iPhone 17 hasn't come yet. So what exactly is the iPhone Air? I think that it's useful at this point to talk about what the Air nameplate stands for and how it's been somewhat diminished over the past decade or so. I was going to use the word desecrated, but that's not exactly right. Diminished is what I'm going to go with. So the first of Apple's Air products was the MacBook Air from 2008, and to this day, I would have to say that it was one of the most exciting devices that Apple had ever launched. Now, at the time, there was a standard MacBook that used plastic for the body, and it was fine for most users, and there was also the more expensive MacBook Pro, which is far larger and more powerful, and was also made of more premium materials. The MacBook Air was a breath of fresh air in the way that while it did cost as much as a MacBook Pro, performance-wise, it performs roughly the same as the standard MacBook, if not slightly worse. So the idea was, if you wanted to spend more money on your MacBook, you could choose between two different options, both just as expensive to achieve, really. You could go for outright performance, or you could pay for the ultimate expression of design and portability. Just because you could afford it doesn't necessarily mean that you need the bulk and the performance of a Pro, and that's where the Air came in. The second generation of the MacBook Air, well, was far more of a commercial success than the original one, and it also pioneered the popular use of flash memory in laptops. I feel like that it didn't really push the envelope as much as the original, but it did start at $999 instead of $1799, so it was far more affordable. And eventually it would sort of become the de facto replacement for the basic MacBook, as the technologies that the original pioneered became more commonplace. The iPad Air, likewise, while it was a lot slimmer than the iPad that it replaced, it was not a device that sat alongside the standard iPad, rather it replaced it, and that was evidenced when it was ultimately replaced by the iPad Pro. But the iPad Air is now back, and it seems to be just a more affordable version of the iPad Pro. Hilariously, the Air is somehow both thicker and heavier than the Pro. Apple, you could have literally called the iPad Air anything else. But no, we literally live in a situation where the Air is fatter than the Pro. Make that make sense. And that is why I love the idea of the iPhone Air, because it's a very similar offering to what the original MacBook Air provided. It's a more premium device, but you don't necessarily get more performance, rather you're paying for the design. And what I absolutely adore about it is the fact that it gives me that same feeling that I got when I used the original MacBook Air for the very first time, and by extension, the same feeling that I got with those old iPhone launches. Let's put it side by side against my old iPhone 16 Pro Max. And while visually they might look relatively similar, when you hold them in your hand, you really get a sense of lightness with the Air that only comes from a phone that's around 60 grams lighter. It is also a little bit thinner at 5.6 versus 8.25 millimeters. That's around 2.5 millimeters difference. But thanks to the more polished, more rounded sides, the impression that you get from the iPhone Air is sort of a phone that's around half the thickness of the old phone. It's sort of incredible. Throughout my week of passing the phone to random people, everyone commented about how light the Air is compared to their iPhones, and I believe that is basically the best part of the phone, how slim and light it feels. With the titanium edges and the glass sandwich as well, when you are using the phone, it doesn't even feel like that you're using a phone. Rather, it just feels like that you're swiping and you're typing on an organic piece of glass. The rounded corners also feel much more organic than the rounded corners of other iPhones somehow. And the overall impression, especially with the new liquid glass, is just of sheer pleasure. While there are other thin phones that you can buy, like the Galaxy S25 Edge, and there's also other phones with interesting designs, like the Motorola Razr for instance, nothing have I ever used has this sort of perceived polish or futurism of the iPhone Air. I mean, even the camera bump, or plateau as they prefer to call it now, doesn't really get on my nerves that much, although I thought it would. While it is quite substantial, if you look at it, it's roughly the same thickness as the rest of the phone again. It is somehow designed in a way where the single chrome camera lens just looks like a floating chrome ring situated on a translucent cloud. It really isn't that bad at all. It's quite pretty actually. Hardware-wise, the 6.5-inch screen feels like a great compromise between the smaller 6.3-inch iPhone Pro and also the slightly larger 6.9-inch of the Pro Max. And while it's larger than what I typically prefer, the slimmer chassis and the lighter weight does make the large screen actually feel more manageable than it sounds. For example, I can actually wrap my fingers around the entire phone with one hand and actually sort of type with it as well. It's not an impossibility like typing with one hand was on the iPhone Max. Like, I can't reach that P. Tragic, I know. The screen is also impossibly pretty. It's a 1260p 120Hz OLED that typically maxes out at 1000 nits, which is a lot, but it can also go up to an incredible 3000 nits. And for the first time in a while, I haven't had an issue with this phone dimming underneath direct sunlight. And it's just so nice and bright all the time. Although, to be fair, I'm currently in the UK and summer is definitely over, so please take that statement with a grain of salt. The iPhone Air also has the action button, which I do actually now prefer over the ringer switch, which I thought I would miss. We also have the camera control button from last year's phones as well, which is a great shortcut button to open the camera. I don't know how we lived without this button in the past. Despite that, I am still unsure about swiping on the camera control button to change the settings. That still feels a little bit convoluted if you ask me. One point of contention is that we do have a USB-C port that's only USB 2 speeds on the bottom. And while I should be mad at it, I'm not really, because when was the last time most people used the data port to transfer data? To be fair, while I do it quite often as I import photos and videos from my camera with an SD card reader quite often, I do believe this to be quite an edge use case. And on the back of the phone, obviously, we do have our MagSafe with wireless charging, and that's where the MagSafe battery fits onto. It's very nice indeed. What is also quite controversial with the iPhone Air is the fact that it also no longer has a physical SIM card slot anywhere in the world. And while this annoys me a lot, as I do test a lot of phones, and having to go through the hassle of transferring an eSIM is not something that I take pleasure in, but it should be a non-issue for most people, I imagine. And the other controversy is the fact that we only have a mono speaker. Now, it really depends on who you are, if this will annoy you or not. I feel like that ever since Apple bought Beats quite a few years ago now, that the speakers on all of their devices, whether that's an Apple Watch, a Mac, an iPad, or iPhone, I think their speakers are all generally top in class. And the iPhone speakers have been really, really good lately. So the iPhone Air only having a mono speaker on the top here doesn't really mean that it's a bad speaker, because it still sounds relatively decent compared to a lot of other phones that I've tested. But obviously it's not as good as the Pro. I have to say, although this difference is stark, and while I do listen to a lot of podcasts and YouTube videos through the phone speaker, it's not something that's really bothered me while I've been using the phone. So now the question is, what is using iOS 26 like on the iPhone Air? Well, let's just say that this thing absolutely flies. I mean, look at these Geekbench scores. That is an absolutely insane figure, especially for something this thin. And the thing is, after performing the test many times in succession, the number really didn't drop that much. So for ordinary use, I don't really see anyone having too many issues in regards to throttling. And if we have a look at my 3D Mark Still Nomad Lite Unlimited test over here, we can see that it ranges from around 1449 going down to 1227. So the difference once the thermal throttling has kicked in is not too substantial. While I'm not sure why the Air needed to have the A19 Pro processor when the standard A19 would have worked just as well, because this has the fastest processor available right now, it means that while this phone feels very brisk today, it will also perform very well in 3, 5, or even 7 years' time. When I was playing Grid Legends on this thing, which is a console title, as we can see over here, I could play the game for hours at maximum settings in graphics mode without any noticeable slowdown. And if we have a look at the thermal camera, the phone phone remains remarkably cool in the portion where you actually hold it, but it does get a little bit warm around the plateau area, reaching almost 50 degrees Celsius. What I love about using the iPhone Air is that, sort of like how the iPhone 5S felt like that it was made for iOS 7, the iPhone Air feels like that it was the intended candidate for iOS 26. There's no device where liquid glass feels better suited than this one. And that's because when you are using the phone, as I've said before, it just feels like that you are holding a plane of glass. From the way that it feels like that you are typing on a sheet of glass, as you see the background elements distort beautifully, to moving the selection bubble on the taskbar inside Apple Music, to just scrolling in Safari. Say what you like about iOS 26, but all those questions that you had about it, well, all of those decisions seem justified when you are using it on the iPhone Air. It really feels like hardware and software in perfect sync. My only issue with the usability really is the fact that while it does feel more compact than how you would expect a typical 6.5-inch phone to feel, it still feels slightly too large for single-handed usage. I really had to stretch my thumb, for instance, to reach the far side of the keyboard, and shuffling my phone in my palm to reach the notification panel or the control center. Those are things that I feel Apple really needs to address for larger phones. And now that we've talked about liquid glass, we now need to address the next big concern about this phone, and it is the battery life. And I have to ask the question, what concern? Because the battery life on the iPhone Air, while it isn't amazing, it definitely is adequate, and similar to what I found on the smaller iPhone Pro phones over the past few years. My typical usage has seen around 3 to 4 hours of screen on time, which should last most people through a typical working day. Is it fantastic? Of course not, but it's far better than what some people have led us to believe. And I do have to be honest, my typical phone usage is pretty relentless. So on a long day out, I typically never leave the house without a battery, even when I carried a Pro Max with me. And that is where this comes in. The MagSafe battery that you can purchase from Apple for $99 US, and it fits the iPhone Air so well that the battery inside this battery pack is literally the same one that you find inside the actual iPhone Air itself. And I would say that if you have one of these phones, it is a must buy if you get the iPhone Air. Not only because it fits in the pocket so easily, being so slim and weighing only around 120 grams, but it means that you can just pop it on when you are running low on battery. And if you like, you can also use it as a MagSafe puck, as it does support reverse wireless charging and pass-through charging as well. I absolutely adored the original MagSafe battery on my iPhone 12 mini because of how seamless it was, and this feels like the exact same thing but for the larger iPhone Air. Please be aware though that this battery only supports the iPhone Air and does not fit on a Pro or any other iPhone really, so you have been warned. So now let's get to the deal breaker of this iPhone for me, the reason why I'm returning it. And I'm afraid that it is the camera. I mean, it isn't all that bad, it's just not really suited for my needs. So the thing is, as you can tell, I do a lot of social media. And while I do love carrying a dedicated camera with me, I love my OM3. In environments like concerts, let's say, you aren't really allowed to bring a camera. And even if you did bring a pocketable camera like a Ricoh GR, the zoom isn't great. So my phone's camera is very important to me, and for the most part, the iPhone Air's camera is really good. What I was most impressed about actually was the fact that the 24 megapixel front-facing camera, which is actually shared among the entire iPhone 17 range, it really is incredibly impressive. While I did fear at first it would be similar to the iPad's new-ish center stage camera, which is mediocre beyond belief, luckily this is not that. On the iPad's center stage camera, they gave it an extremely wide lens to accommodate the rarely used center stage feature, without actually increasing the sensor size to accommodate the crop required to return to a reasonable focal length. And so it's far blurrier and grainier than it needs to be. I feared that they would do a similar thing with the iPhone's front camera, but luckily no, they've actually made it better. As we can see in this comparison video with the iPhone 16 Pro Max's old camera, not only is the low light performance massively improved, but because it is a larger sensor, you can actually zoom out to accommodate a group selfie quite easily without sacrificing image quality. And what's even cooler than that is the fact that the sensor is now square in shape, which means that you can go landscape while you are holding the phone in portrait orientation and vice versa. It works so well, and I feel that for many content creators, it would be upgrading to the 17 series of phones just for the front-facing camera. And yeah, the video stabilization is also incredible on the 17 series of phones as well for the front-facing camera. On the back though, you might notice that there's only one camera, and there's no LiDAR as well. I have to be honest and say that I didn't really notice the lack of a LiDAR sensor. It's not something that I use often, and I have to admit that I'm not sure just how much it aids with autofocus. But if you need LiDAR for whatever reason, like mapping rooms or whatever, then the Air probably is not the phone for you. Despite the Air having the smaller 48 megapixel sensor from the standard iPhone 17, which is a 1 in 1.56 inch sensor compared to the 1 in 2.8 inch sensor on the Pro phone, I have to admit that even in low light, I really struggle to find much of a difference between the two. Just look at these examples. It really is quite difficult to discern whether one is better than the other. They really are quite similar. If we zoom into the shots taken with a 2x crop, it's actually quite difficult to see if one has more detail than the other, and that may be because of the identical resolution. So to try to uncover any difference, I tried some low light shots. And I do think that the Pro definitely has an advantage here. It's far less prone to going into night mode where it will get a longer exposure, and when things are equal, there's marginally less noise and slightly more detail as well, but the difference is small. I thought that maybe the Pro phone would have a shallower natural depth of field, but in my tests, it's difficult to tell much difference at first, although after some inspection, there is some shallower depth of field, albeit very subtly so. The biggest difference between the two, as you might expect, are the other two cameras, which are missing. Now, I have to admit that I don't really mind the lack of a wider camera that much. I generally am not a fan of extremely wide lenses, and if you really do need something wider, at a pinch you could use the panorama mode. But what I did miss a lot was the telephoto lens, and that's not helped by the fact that the telephoto lens on the 17 Pro is considerably better. I mean, considerably better than what we had on the 16. The thing is, I like taking images of people. I mean, it's memories of people rather than places I want to capture. And the wide angle lenses of the main iPhone cameras just is not ideal for that. The 50mm or roughly 2x crop does work a lot better, but on the 17 Pro, I absolutely adore the new 100mm camera, which just looks so sharp and fantastic for a phone. It is a brilliant portrait lens, but perhaps what's even more useful than that is the fact that you can have a lossless 200mm mode or an 8x zoom, and it works really well when the situation is bright. But what really tipped me over the edge was when I went to see my favorite band Feeder recently. Unfortunately, we were relatively late, so we were quite far from the front, and that meant that I really needed to rely on my camera zoom capabilities. And the difference between these two cameras was so stark, it's a little bit silly. If we take a look at the difference in images between the two, where the iPhone Air looks like a random blur of pixels, the iPhone 17 Pro, the photos that I took almost look acceptable. And this is a situation that I feel a lot of us find ourselves in. Our phones are there to capture things in unexpected situations, which means that an ultra-wide or a telephoto camera is often more useful than not. If we have a look at the videos, that's perhaps even more stark. The iPhone Air only zooms to around 6 times and the Pro 24 times. And just take a look at the difference here. I love going to concerts, and while I may have been happy with the iPhone Air's performance a decade ago, just knowing that the Pro is out there and it will allow me to capture memories that the Air just can't, well, I am happy to carry a fatter, uglier phone with me just to have that amazing telephoto camera. So in conclusion, while I am a person who absolutely adores the iPhone Air for everything that it is, while I absolutely love its design, its ambition, while also having remarkably few compromises, I feel like just like how I use a MacBook Pro instead of a MacBook Air, even if it is uglier, the Pro is the phone for me. It's a similar argument between having a flip phone and a normal smartphone. Actually, I do feel that the Air is Apple's equivalent to the Motorola Razr or the Samsung Z Flip. While I do love the form factor of those phones, I demand so much from my phone these days that I'm happy to overlook the fun design to have something a little bit more practical. Because unfortunately, my phone is probably the most used piece of tech that I own, and I rely on it so much that it needs to be a professional tool and not just a toy. So what are your thoughts on the iPhone Air? I would love to hear it. Did you choose it over the Pro model this year? Or if not, what stopped you from getting the Air? Let me know in the comments. And this video is brought to you by the Arc Pulse case, which is now available for iPhone 17 Pro, but I don't have that yet. And it's also coming to the iPhone Air later this year. Especially after having used the frankly very disappointing tech woven case this year, I feel that a case is something that can either make or break your phone experience in more ways than one. And over the past few years, I've grown tired of ugly, bulky, clear, leather, plastic or fine woven cases that, while will protect your phone, just make it worse to use and also just makes it really ugly and bulky. And that's why I love the Arc Pulse, because they're made of metal, so you don't have to replace them when they get grubby after a few months. They just slip on really, really easily without any adhesives. And not only do they look absolutely gorgeous, but they actually allow you to touch and feel your phone that you bought while also protecting all of the corners. I've dropped my 14, my 15 and 16 so many times, and never have I damaged a phone with the Arc Pulse case on it. They also act as sort of little handles, so it makes taking your phone out of your pocket a little bit easier, and it also gives you a little bit of extra grip when you are holding your phone. You have 30 days after the launch of this video to save 10% off your case, and after that period you can still buy with the link, but you won't save. However, I will still get a commission, so I would appreciate it if you could help me out there. So just follow the link in the description. Otherwise, I hope that you are having an absolutely amazing day. Give me a like and subscribe if you haven't done so yet, and toodaloo.